Terror erupts in Galactic Council as humans refuse to apologize for one death. HFY. HFY Sci-Fi Story. The session ledger has a gap where an answer was supposed to go. Deliberation 2204. Tethani Accord Chamber. The timestamp reads 4 minutes and 11 seconds, official, logged, unmodified. The field where the procedural category should appear is blank. 1 death, 1 human security officer. 31 species in a room built to make the smaller party feel the distance between the floor and the bench. The Galactic Compact has not corrected the ledger entry. No one has filed to correct it. That gap is the most cited element of Session 2204 across 4 species diplomatic communications. And it was produced by a silence. And the silence was produced by a question. And the question was carried into the chamber by 2 people, one of whom held a folder thin enough to slide under a door. No designation, no correction, no explanation. My name is Ren Ossel. I am archive compiler, seconded from the Foreign Affairs Directorate's Institutional Memory Division to the Galactic Compact Deliberation Record Office. I was in the gallery on the day of Session 2204. I am writing this compiled record 14 months later, which is how long it has taken me to decide what to call what I saw. I have not yet decided. What I have decided is that the ledger entry stays as I logged it, that the designation field stays blank, and that the record should contain everything that led to 4 minutes and 11 seconds of a room full of 31 species making no sound at all. The session was called to extract an apology. What it produced instead was a silence that has since been cited in 9 formal diplomatic briefs as evidence of institutional failure, according to the briefs filed by 4 species, as evidence of something no one had a word for yet, according to the other 5. The briefs diverge on the label. They agree on the duration. 4 minutes, 11 seconds. What she does with 7 pages, you'll want to hear all of it. Stay close. The session opened at the 3rd bell of the Compact's deliberation cycle, a time chosen by the Drevhari Compact in their capacity as convening authority, which they had the right to do. I note this not as a complaint, but as a fact that belongs in the record. The Drevhari Compact held rotating convening authority. They exercised it. The choice of session time, the assignment of the chamber, the selection of Deliberation 2204's procedural track, all of it fell within their rights. I am recording the structure because the structure is part of what happened. The Tethani Accord Chamber was built 212 years ago by the same architectural firm that designed every major Drevhari administrative building of that period. The design philosophy has not changed. The bench sits 3.8 meters above the floor grade. The petitioner's position is a flat disk of cold stone, surfaced and polished 9 centimeters below the surrounding floor. There is no marking on the official chamber floor plan to indicate the recess. You step into it and you feel it through the soles of your shoes, a small drop, a deliberate one, cold through the material even in a heated room. The chamber holds 140 in the gallery. On the day of Session 2204, it held more than that. People were standing at the back. Convening Arbiter Threshson took his seat at the bench 11 minutes before the session opened and placed his deliberation rod on the surface in front of him. This gesture is so practiced that it has its own notation in the Compact's procedural manual, a specific entry describing the placement of the rod as a signal that the Arbiter has formally assumed the convening role. Threshson is 2.1 meters tall, copper-brown in coloring, with gray-silver rings around his eyes that brighten under the deliberation chamber's fluorescent lighting. His dorsal ridge, a secondary structure that runs from shoulder to mid-spine, was flat when he sat down. It flares slightly involuntarily when he is agitated. His species calls this the old flag. I had read about it before the session. I watched for it. He had held a Drevhari Compact bench seat for 23 years. He had delivered formal rulings in 187 contested sessions. He had never, in those 23 years, called a recess mid-session. The co-signatory delegations arrived in order of their petition filing dates. The main confederation entered first, led by Arbiter Suvandrel, a tall figure with a habit I noticed within his first 10 minutes in the gallery. He clicked the cap of his notation stylus in groups of 3 when he was thinking through a problem. Click, 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 pause, then again. I mention it because it matters later. The Suri remnant arrived last, 11 minutes after session opened. Their delegates sat at the far end of the co-signatory bench and did not speak to the main representative before the session began. The Havath observer, whose name I have redacted from the public version of this record at the delegate's own formal request, sat in the neutral observer tier and had already begun writing when I entered the gallery. They write quickly, with small, precise marks. I noted early that they had not stopped writing since I sat down. The gallery's atmosphere was not hostile. That is the wrong word for it. The word I kept reaching for in my notes from that day was anticipatory. It had the texture of a room that had already decided what it was going to witness and was waiting for the events to match the decision. Attaché Solon Breck and her aide arrived 4 minutes before the session opened. I want to be precise about how she entered the chamber because I have thought about it many times in the 14 months since, and I think the way she entered is part of the record. She did not hurry. She did not look around the gallery to gauge the room. She walked to the petitioner's area, took her third step down onto the cold stone disc. The recess requires 3 steps from the chamber floor to reach, and she did not look at the floor when she stepped down. She set her folder on the raised lip of the disc. She adjusted its position once. Then she stood there, weight even, and she did not touch the folder again until she was ready to open it. She wore a plain enamel delegation marker on her left lapel, the size of a thumbnail, no other decoration, nothing to read from a distance. Her aide, Darrow Fenn, stood slightly behind her and to the right. He was 26 years old and on his second diplomatic posting. He carried nothing. I learned later that this was deliberate. Breck had spent 24 years as a naval court recorder before moving into diplomatic attaché work. She had worked 11 of those years on cases where jurisdiction was disputed and where the record itself became the deciding factor. I interviewed her once, 11 months after session 2204, in a small office in the Foreign Affairs Directorate's Sublevel 4. She described the Coldstone Disc as a design choice, not an obstacle. She said it the way someone says a thing that they decided a long time ago and have not had to revise. Before she spoke a word in that chamber, I watched her do something so small I almost missed it. The pad of her left thumb pressed 3 times against her index finger. Tap, tap, tap. She did it with a hand that was not holding the folder. None of the translators caught it. Every human in the gallery knew what it meant because the human delegation's briefing documents. I have these now. They were filed into the compact archive as supporting materials, describe the habit. She does it when she has already decided, not when she is deciding, when she is done. She had already decided before she stepped into the room. Now, before I describe what she said, I need to tell you what the Drevhari Compact filed. The petition was 94 pages. It concerned the death of a Drevhari liaison officer named Sorvith Aeldon, 28 years in service, decorated 4 times. He died during a boarding incident on a civilian cooperative freighter, the Solon's Margin 9 crew, one of whom was traveling with 2 children under 10. The Drevhari inspection team had boarded under a jurisdictional clause that allowed boarding rights in certain contested transit corridors. The human security officer aboard the freighter had fired during the confrontation. Sorvith Aeldon died. The petition framed the incident as deliberate aggression and demanded a formal apology entered into permanent compact record. The petition did not reference one thing. In the 16 months before the boarding, 2 observer delegations had formally flagged the boarding clause as jurisdictionally ambiguous, disputed in its scope, imprecise in its application to civilian vessels in the specific corridor type where Solon's Margin was traveling. One of those delegations was the Drevhari Compact's own treaty partner. The flag appears in the session record. It appears in the compact archive. It does not appear anywhere in the 94 pages of the Drevhari petition. I am the archive compiler. I found it in 40 minutes. Threshson opened the session at the 3rd bell. He placed the deliberation rod on the bench. He addressed the chamber for 37 minutes. I will not quote his address at length. It is in the record and anyone who wishes to read it may. What I will say is this. He spoke about Sorvith Aeldon's service, his rank, his family, the specific nature of his wound, and the 4 minutes it took him to die after the confrontation. He spoke about the Drevhari Compact standing in the Galactic Order. He spoke about what it means when a species that considers itself civilized allows its personnel to be killed without consequence. He spoke about the apology the petition demanded, a formal entry into compact record, read into the permanent archive, acknowledging that the human security officer's action was an act of aggression against a lawful boarding team. He set the deliberation rod on the bench before he began and did not pick it up during his address. He did not need to. He was not ruling, he was building. Threshson had built 187 rulings in 23 years. He was very good at building. The co-signatory delegations did not speak after his address. They did not need to. The petition had already been read into record before the session opened. The room turned and waited for the human response. Velon, my fellow compiler, a Suri, quick at shorthand, reliable in sessions where the speaking was fast, had his transcription stylus ready. I had mine. We were both recording. Suvandrel's stylus cap, click, 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 pause, click, click, click. Breck did not open with a counter-argument. She spoke 3 sentences. She confirmed the facts not in dispute. The boarding had occurred, the confrontation had occurred, and Sorvith Aeldon had died during it. The human security officer had remained on board the freighter and given a full statement within 2 hours of the incident. And this 3rd sentence, delivered in the same level tone as the first 2, a human judicial process for the security officer had been formally initiated 9 days before the Drevhari petition was filed. She did not say accountability. She did not say process or procedure or compliance. She said, the process was started 9 days before you filed. She let that sit. The compact archive contains the record of the judicial initiation. The petition does not reference it. I checked this before the session. I am noting it now because it belongs in the record, and because the petition's silence on the point was not an oversight. A 94-page document does not accidentally omit a fact that changes the shape of what it is asking. I noticed Suvandrel's stylus cap had slowed. Click, pause, click. Breck reached for the folder on the lip of the disk. She opened it. What she produced was not a counterbrief. It was not a human document at all. It was 7 pages, and they were the Drevhari Compact's own attachment to their petition, the deceased officer's full service record submitted to establish his standing and the weight of the loss. She had read the Drevhari petition 3 times before the session. She had read their attachment. She brought it back to the chamber in which they had filed it, opened it to his name, and she read it out loud. She read the officer's name first, Sorvith Aeldon, then his service duration 28 years, then his first commendation and the mission it was awarded for, then his second, then his third, then his fourth. The chamber was quieter than it had been. Threshson had not moved. His dorsal ridge was flat. Velon had stopped transcribing. I noted this in my personal session log, not the official record, the notes I kept on my own paper, the ones where my handwriting shifts. He stopped at the 3rd commendation. He did not start again for some time. Suvandrel's stylus cap did not click once during the reading. I want to say something about Sorvith Aeldon that is not in the formal record, and that I am choosing to put here, in the compiled version, because I have the authority to do so, and because I think it belongs. He had served for 28 years. His 4th commendation was for evacuating civilian personnel from a failing station. His species commendation language, translated literally, says, he was the last to leave. The Drevhari petition had filed his record to establish his worth. Breck read his record to establish his name. Those are not the same thing, and the room knew it, and that is when the chamber's atmosphere changed from anticipatory to something I still do not have a clean word for. Breck closed the folder. She set it on the lip of the disk. Then she did something I only understood later, watching back through my own notes. She shifted her weight from her left foot to her right foot once, a movement so small that it would have been invisible from the gallery if I had not been watching her specifically. She settled, and then she looked at Threshson. She had 3-tapped before the reading. She did not 3-tap again. She was going to lay out the conditions of the boarding, the armed inspection team, the civilian manifest, the 2 children, the jurisdictional clause that 2 delegations had flagged as contested. She was going to put all of it in the record in the room where the petition had been filed, and then she was going to ask one question. I did not know yet what the question was. I knew it was coming. The chamber knew it was coming. The way a room changes when something is building, not louder, quieter, but a specific kind of quiet, the kind that happens when people stop preparing what they are going to say and start listening. That change had already happened. Suvandrel had put his notation stylus flat on the desk. He was not clicking the cap. He was looking at the petitioner's disk. The Haveth observer had not put their writing instrument down. Not yet. That came later. Threshson had not moved his deliberation rod. Breck breathed once, set her jaw, and she began. She laid out the boarding conditions the way a court recorder lays out evidence. Not arguing, not pushing, just placing each fact where the room could see it. The inspection team had been armed. Standard protocol, the Drevhari petition noted, for contested transit corridor checks. Breck confirmed this. She also confirmed the timing. The team had boarded at 3:40 ship time with no prior notification to the freighter's crew. She confirmed the civilian manifest. 9 crew members, one of whom was a cooperative shareholder traveling with her 2 children, ages 6 and 8, who were in the crew quarters when the team came through the corridor. She confirmed the jurisdictional clause the team had operated under, the same clause that 2 observer delegations had flagged as ambiguous in the 16 months before the boarding, one of which was the Drevhari Compact's own treaty partner. She did not argue that the security officer was right to fire. She did not argue that he was wrong. She stated what existed in that corridor in the moment before the confrontation. An armed team, a disputed authorization, a civilian crew, 2 children on the other side of a bulkhead door, and one man whose job was to stand between them and whatever came through. She stated it the same way she had stated the facts at the opening. No weight put on any particular word, just the words and the room left to do the math. Threshson had not moved. His dorsal ridge was still flat. The Suri Remnants delegate, I noted this because it struck me, was not looking at Threshson. I could not tell from my gallery position when this had started. I only knew that when I looked at the co-signatory bench during Breck's account of the boarding conditions, the Suri delegate was looking at the floor in front of her own seat. Not at Breck, not at Threshson, at the floor. I went back through my personal session notes later, and I cannot find the moment it began. She was looking at him during Threshson's address. At some point she stopped. Suvandrel's stylus was flat on the desk. It had not moved in some time. Breck reached the end of the boarding account. She did not pause for effect. She did not look at her aide or at the gallery or at the co-signatories. The folder was closed at her side. She looked up at the bench. No preamble, no argument, no second sentence. She asked Threshson one question. If a Drevhari freighter, civilian cooperative, children aboard, had been boarded without warning by a human armed team, operating under a clause that the Drevhari's own treaty partner had formally flagged as disputed, and a Drevhari crew member had fired to protect the others, would the Drevhari compact apologize? She did not repeat the question. She did not look around the room. She stood in the cold stone disk, 9 centimeters below grade, and she waited. I kept logging. That is my job. I noted the time, I noted that the question had been delivered, and I left the designation field blank because I did not know what to call what was happening. I still have the original log sheet. My handwriting, which is printed block letters in every other document from those 14 months, shifts to a compressed cursive at the exact moment the silence began. I have never done that anywhere else in the record. The Havath observer set their writing instrument down 40 seconds into the silence. They did not pick it up again. Velon beside me had stopped transcribing before the question was finished. He told me later, when I asked him to confirm my session notes, that he had stopped because he felt that transcribing in that moment would be the wrong thing to do, though he could not explain why. He is a precise professional with 11 years in record work. He has never described a session moment that way before or since. The co-signatory delegations did not look at Threshson. The main Confederation's arbiter was looking at his hands. The Suri delegate was still looking at the floor. The 3 smaller species whose names appear in the petition's smaller typeface were looking at one another, or at the middle distance, or at nothing I could identify. No one looked at Threshson. The Orenic Directorate's senior delegation member, seated in the highest tier of the observer section, a position that looks down across the entire chamber floor, had not moved since the question was asked. I mean this precisely. Of all the figures in the room, across all the delegations and observer tiers and gallery seats, the Orenic senior member was the one who made no movement at all. I did not note this in my real-time session log. I am noting it now, 14 months later in the compiled record, because I spent 14 months deciding whether it mattered. I have decided it does. The Orenic Directorate has the longest institutional memory of any species currently seated in the compact. They have been present for every major structural shift in compact governance in the last 400 years. When a species with that history goes completely still in a room where something is happening, that is not nothing. I do not know what they saw. I know they saw it before most other people in the room did, because they stopped moving before the silence had gone a full minute, and they were already the first delegation to leave when the recess was called. But I am not at the recess yet. The silence lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know this because I logged it second by second because I did not know what else to do. It is the longest undesignated interval in the compact's deliberation record. I have checked. Nothing comes close. Breck stood in the disk for the entirety of it. Weight even. Folder closed at her side. She did not look around the room. She did not shift her weight again after the single small movement before the question. She looked at Threshson. Her expression from my gallery position was the expression of someone who has already done what they came to do and is waiting for the room to finish understanding it. Darrow Fenn told me, 11 months later, that he spent the 4 minutes and 11 seconds trying to remember if he had ever been in a room that large that had gone that quiet. The closest he could come was a cathedral on Earth he had visited as a child, old stone, high ceiling, an organ that had stopped mid-phrase, and for some reason no one in the building had coughed. Now I need to tell you what was happening at the bench. The carved deliberation rod was in front of Threshson. He had placed it there at the opening of the session, the same way he had placed it at the opening of 187 sessions before this one. The rod is pale bone mineral, carved with the session record marks of every ruling he has delivered in 23 years. It is a significant object. Setting it down signals a ruling is coming. Picking it up signals the ruling is ready. He had never, in 23 years, called a recess mid-session. The question was in the air. It had been in the air for Breck would not count the seconds, she told me later. She said counting seconds is what you do when you are not sure the silence will hold, and she was sure some length of time that the room was measuring differently than she was. She had stood in rooms designed to transmit a message to whoever stood in the lower position. She had spent 24 years learning that the message only transmits if the person in the lower position accepts it. The cold stone disc was 9 centimeters below the floor. It was cold through her shoes. She did not read the cold as a message. She read it as a surface, and she stood on it, and she looked at the bench, and she waited. The question was symmetrical. She knew what a symmetrical question does in a room with 31 delegations and a recording system. It enters the permanent archive regardless of whether it is answered. The silence at that point was already the answer. She had known this before she walked in. At the bench, Threshson reached for the carved rod. He picked it up. He set it down. He called a recess. In the 2 hours and 58 minutes that followed, no delegation contacted the human team. Not the Drevhari Compact. Not the co-signatories. Not the observers. Not any of the 31 delegations or their support staff. Breck and Darrow Fenn walked to Relay Corridor 11 and sat on a bench outside a maintenance access door and did not move. No one came. No one sent a message. No one asked to meet. The corridor's atmosphere processors ran a maintenance cycle during that time. A low, repeating hum. Darrow told me he remembers the sound clearly. The Orenic Directorate's senior member was the first to leave the chamber when the recess was called. I noted this at the time. I am noting it again here because I think it belongs close to what happened next. When the chamber reconvened, the petition had been modified. This happened by joint motion of the Drevhari Compact and the main confederation. The other co-signatories are recorded as non-objecting, which is not the same as consenting, and I have noted the distinction explicitly in the session record because the difference matters, and because distinctions that matter should be named. The demand for a formal apology had been removed from the petition. In its place, the modified petition established a Joint Protocol Clarity Commission, Drevhari and human co-chaired, with Suri remnant observer status, tasked with examining the jurisdictional clause and producing a binding clarification within 18 months. Threshson delivered the procedural confirmation of the modification in the same level voice he uses for all rulings. His dorsal ridge during the delivery was flat. The human security officer's judicial process continued on its original timeline, unchanged, as it always had been going to, as it had been running for 9 days before the petition was even filed. The petition had never been going to change that. The commission would not change it. The apology demand had been the only element of the petition that could have touched the process, and the apology demand was gone. The 7-page service record, the Drevhari delegation's own attachment, re-entered into the session record by Breck during her address, was sealed into the compact archive as submitted evidence. It is permanently attached to session 2204. The deceased officer's name, Sorvith Aeldon, appears 3 times in the final session transcript. Each time it appears in the same sentence as the jurisdictional flag. That is not an accident. That is what the record looks like when the document is read correctly. She read, she closed the folder, she waited. That is all she did. Threshson is still seated at the Drevhari Compact's bench. He was not removed, not transferred, not disciplined. He reconvened the session and delivered the procedural modification in proper form. He will continue to sit on that bench and deliver rulings in contested sessions. This is not a failure of the record. This is what AF9 looks like when it is real rather than symbolic. The structural geometry of what happened in that chamber does not require his removal. The recess is in the record. The modification is in the record. The apology demand is not in the record because it was withdrawn. What is in the record is what was not said, and what was not said is its own kind of permanent. The Compact's Procedural Standards Office reviewed the 4-minute 11-second ledger entry at the Drevhari delegation's formal request. This request came in 7 weeks after the session. The Standards Office spent 4 months reviewing it. Their finding was returned to my office 6 months later. No existing procedural category fits the interval. The gap will remain as logged. The designation field will remain blank. Breck and Darrow Fenn walked Relay Corridor 11 after the session closed. The maintenance hum was still going. Darrow asked if she had known Threshson would call a recess instead of answering. She said she had not known. He asked what she had known. She walked 6 steps before she answered. I am counting the steps because he counted them and told me, and because I think the 6 steps belong in the record the same way the 3-tap tell belongs in the record. Small things that tell you what kind of person you are looking at. She said she had known that a question with only one honest answer, asked in a room with 31 delegations and a full recording system, does not require the person who asks it to do anything further. The question does the work. You just have to be willing to stand there while it does. Darrow asked what she would have done if they had answered. Breck said that was not a question she had needed to prepare for. The record is filed. This compiled version is the one that will be distributed to the Compact's member species under the standard disclosure schedule. Session 2204 will be accessible in the Compact archive to any accredited delegate or institutional researcher who requests it. The gap is in the record, the name is in the record, the question is in the record. I filed the compiled version this morning using my standard cover sheet. The cover sheet has a field for session outcome. I typed, modified petition, commission established, ledger anomaly, designation pending review, confirmed unresolvable, no correction filed. Then I looked at it for a long time. Then I sent it. The Tethani Accord Chamber is 140 seats and standing room. The petitioner's disk is cold stone, 9 centimeters below grade, unmarked on the official floor plan. The deliberation rod is pale bone mineral, carved with 23 years of rulings, resting on a bench 3.8 meters above the floor. The ledger entry reads 4 minutes 11 seconds, designation field blank. Every species that accesses session 2204 will see it. They will see the gap where the answer was supposed to go, and they will see how long it lasted, and they will fill in the designation themselves. In whatever word their language uses for a truth a room already knew and could not say out loud.